Hello. Lucky me. Yeah. Hi. I'm George. I used to work for Total War or on Total War for Creative Assembly for a few years, about 5 to 2 years ago, and then moved into indie publishing with Modern Wolf, where I started as a brand manager and left as head of brand earlier this year, but also was taking part with biz dev, scouting, all the other stuff that kind of goes alongside working at a small publisher, and saw hundreds of beautiful pitches, and have been doing some talks on pitching and all kinds of stuff ever since. And since April, I've been working for Secret Source, which is a agency supporting studios with marketing and B2B stuff and biz dev development and getting their game signed with publishers and things like that. So yeah, that's me. Nice. There's always a tech thing.
Does this work? Yes, I think so, which is weird. Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. If anyone is in the chat, please let me know. Um, we're gonna hand over to Meg to say hello and introduce themselves.
Hello, my name's Meg. Hi. I'm what you might call an industry wildcard. I've been kind of around the industry for about 10 years, but I've never done the same job twice. But generally, I've been around in indie development, indie publishing, then a short stint in kind of like incubator and investor stuff. And then I worked for Yuki, which is the UK trade body for games. And then I took a sidestep into audio production. I worked on a whole bunch of really cool games. And then again, I took another wild sidestep into doing this. And I really like this. And I've almost been doing this, which is game scouting for the longest, almost the longest job. So yeah, and I'm really lucky. I get to go around and talk to loads of developers and listen to their game ideas and give them feedback. And obviously, if we like it enough, hopefully take it all the way through our very long process to possibly signing a deal with them. So yeah, um, that's me, I think. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay.
Also, apologies if anyone can hear my cat sneezing in the background. I saw it come up on the waves, and I'm so sorry.
No,
um,
don't apologize for that. That is the cutest thing I
It's
can
so
imagine.
cute. I love him so much, but like he just picked right now to just have a sneezing fit. I love it. And finally, Joshua.
Hello, I'm Josh. I'm the head game scout at Secret Mode. I've been in the industry since 2015. I started out for like a brief, like literally a flash in the pan. I did product management, and then quickly moved into business development, game scouting type roles. Originally, I was at Fireshine as their acquisition manager, which really was Game Scout. They just didn't know what to call it back then. And then I went from Fireshine to Team 17 as a senior Game Scout, and now I'm here, and that's me.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. And a nice overview, I suppose. And for anyone watching who maybe doesn't know what's going on right now, I'll do a little explainer. This is looking at how to pitch to a publisher. At the moment, Safe in Our World is running a mental health themed game jam, which runs till the end of October. There is still time. There is a month left. So if you wanted to get in on it, there is still a chance to do that. So if you're thinking about it, go for it if you can. And we've got another series of masterclasses that are all available on our YouTube channel as well. This one will always be also be there after this stream. So there's a host of different information about the various elements of game development. So please go check that out as well. But to kick things off, how do we start with this? It's such a big topic, I think, but I guess when we're in the position of starting or even having the idea of making a game and starting that initial process in the early stages of development, what planning steps, I guess, should you put in place right at the beginning when you're thinking about pitching a game, or are there any that you should take right at the beginning? I'll start with Meg.
Yeah. I guess my first piece of advice would be to figure out what it is that you need help with. If you can identify the skills within your team, or if it's just obviously you making the game, your skills, and then kind of fill in the blanks of what you don't know, it's always worth evaluating. Do you need a publisher? Do you want to go down the route of public funding? Is this something that you just want to do in your spare time and release and just get a little bit of pocket money from? Think about the scale of the project, what your skills are, where you want to go, what the ambition is before starting to build a pitch. I think sometimes people come to us as publishers with very little idea of like what they what they ultimately want to do. They've just heard that they should get a publisher, but there's so many options out there, and there's so many different versions of help of getting your game to market if you decide that you want to commercialize it. And also there's a lot of satisfaction in releasing games on itch and things like that as well if it's your first time. This advice is obviously coming from knowing that people might be doing a game jam for the first time and might find this, but obviously if you're an experienced developer and you've already kind of figured out, I've done this before, I want to take this to the next level, I definitely need help scaling up, then definitely evaluate everything you've got, everything you need, and then make a short list of the publishers out there that kind of fill that skill gap for you. That would be my first bit of advice, I think.
Awesome. And please do feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think just to follow on from what Meg was saying, when you're obviously this depends on the team you have and the level of experience. Like, think about when you want to start approaching publishers, and kind of set expectations accordingly based at the point at which you decide to approach publishers. I think if you're a very experienced team with, a bit of success under your belt, you can, put a paper pitch in front of publishers. As long as it's detailed, as long as it's well thought out, you can at least get a certain way through the green light process. But it's still, even if you're a new studio with fairly green members, it's still worth putting a paper pitch in front of publishers as long as you know that reasonably they can't progress it, but to just get feedback on it, just to get like, okay, generally speaking, these folks are thinking this, and this about this pitch. So that when you go into the more kind of heavy lifting part of it, of like making a prototype and really fleshing out the pitch, you're going into it informed by that initial wave of feedback rather than kind of going in blind. So yeah, like think about that, like think about the stages of pitching rather than just thinking of it as like i'm gonna pitch to everyone and immediately progress it all the way to contract stage. Like, it can be an evolving process.
I think it's something that is, I don't know, maybe because from an outsider perspective, for example, I've never made a game. I don't know if I'm capable of making a game. But for me, it's always been in my head like, oh, it's something you do right at the end. But then thinking about it, that logically doesn't really make an awful lot of sense, because if you've got a great idea and someone gives you active feedback to be able to improve it and maybe get it to the point where it could be picked up by someone, like that's obviously something you would want to do at the start, instead of not wasting your time but spending so much energy in something that then you could, it could not work out the way you wanted to. So that's super interesting.
I think something to add to that would be as well to start thinking earlyish about who you might want to approach and what kind of publisher you might want to speak to, because you have everything from kind of more generalist indie publishers that will deal with all kinds of stuff. But if you're making a strategy simulation game, there might be a certain publisher that you want to speak to because they're going to be able to provide you with perhaps stronger feedback, or that might influence certain directions you take the game if you're trying to make something that's going to appeal to them in the long term. So I think alongside that process of thinking about what you need, and kind of Meg touched on this already a little bit, it's also thinking about which of those publishers out there are going to best be able to support that final vision that you might have. And it's definitely something that I think you can start thinking about early, because it will and could influence certain directions or decisions that you make with taking the game direction.
Brilliant, thank you.
Give some practical advice on that point, because obviously it's easy enough saying do this thing, but if you're not familiar with this process, like just to point you towards some resources, some ways to kind of have a look what publishers are out there. Like if you have some games in mind when you were making your game that were influencers, check if they had a publisher, check what the reviews are on that publisher. There's a lot of stuff online, like there's a Metacritic of all the different publishers based on their recent performances. There's also a lot of spreadsheets out there on how to get in touch with different publishers and like what the response rate is on those and things like that as well. Definitely like take a look through Steam at some of the benchmark games that are similar to yours and see like, are there a few different publishers or is there one really special one that everyone seems to go towards? But also sort of, narrow it down, but keep your options open at the earlier stages, because then you can just get loads of helpful feedback. But as your pitch kind of refines, you can kind of narrow in on those kind of ideal ones that you've got your heart set on. But don't obviously go straight to those ones and go like, this is it, this is all or nothing. Understand that it's like a long process. Start early, have friendly conversations, take the feedback on board. And then just take it from there. I think most people that are in this business understand that it's a relationship game, and like, taking an interest in people and understanding that it's not like business, hard business right now, is basically kind of how we all approach it, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of really cool stuff on there. Loads of stuff in like indie Discord communities or Slack communities, like the UK games industry one as well. So yeah, lots of people out there that have gathered lots of really useful resources for you to start your search if that's the way you decide you want to go.
So
Actually, sorry, just to follow on, that's a really good point, Meg. Pitch to other developers as well, like ahead of pitching to publishers. Like you just mentioned the UK indie game Slack. I forget what it's called. The UK game Slack. There are loads of people who've just been around the block for ages on there that are more than happy to kind of offer advice and mentoring on pitching. So, like, talk to your peers. Don't just talk to us.
yeah, that was going to be my next question actually, was just like what's your advice on going to other people and asking for their opinion, not only on who to pitch to, but also how exactly to pitch, if they've had any experience in pitching, if they've had feedback from other people, maybe if they're making a game that's similar to yours. So what I'm gathering is that it's encouraged to do that, and it's not like frowned upon to be able to ask other people in the industry who might be in the same position or who might have been in the same position 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing how many people, how connected the games industry is, and I can guarantee that if you jump into most Discords, there'll be somebody in there that at some point has pitched to Meg and Josh. Like there's people out there who have gone through this process 10 times, right? 15 times across different studios and projects and whatever else it might be. And I think the value of networking is potentially you can get feedback on who's really great to speak to, what are people looking for, what kind of stuff is going to really track well with certain publishers, certain scouts, whatever it might be. But you also you can potentially get better connections with certain people because, especially at in-person events, I've seen a lot of discussions happen and first meetings and first initial pitches or like teasers happen where it's been after an event and it's at a drinks mixer or it's at a restaurant outside the Hilton at Brighton at Develop or whatever, right? And I think that's where the value of networking comes in, is just building those connections with other devs, brings publishers closer and makes it a bit less of a kind of us and them thing, and brings the industry as a whole into a bit more of a stronger network, which is super healthy, I think.
So would you say it's like common to have more like casual conversations and discussions around what a pitch should include or what might include, and then kind of continue to develop that over time before making a more formal pitch to a scout, for example?
I think so.
I think it's worth having a few different types of pitches when you finally get to a place that you want to show scouts or like funding bodies or VCs or however you're going about it. I would recommend starting. It's like a job interview, right? Do the pitch to your friends and family. They might be, either depending on your friends and family, a bit harsh or a bit soft, depending on who you surround yourself with. But they will hopefully, if you're, passionate about what you're making, they have an awareness of what it is you're trying to make, and there'll be certain phrases as you're practicing that you're like, oh, that's really sticky. That really describes what I've played, or stuff like that, and you'll start to get like little pithy like sayings or things that like are really which are really good for like introducing your game, because when you get to that kind of final pitch stage, you want to have like the elevator pitch, like the really short one of like, I've just met you in a bar and I can tell you don't want to be pitched at right now, but I have a game that's this meets this with a bit of this. And then the person goes, oh, yeah, let's exchange cards. And then we could do a proper pitch later. Having those piffy little bits is really good. So practice on your friends and family. Then I would say once you feel like a little bit more confident, you've got something together, practice with your peers who maybe don't know your game and see if what you're saying actually is making it through to people that haven't played your game yet. Then I would say go to a scout or go to someone else. And that first initial meeting with a scout doesn't have to be all or end all. Like there are certain pitches and events that are more under pressure for a scout than other ones. I don't know if that's fair to say. Like for instance, like GDC and Gamescom, like most publishers and game scouts have kind of sort of tight KPIs on how they're meant to spend their time there. But on these smaller local events, we have more time to kind of chill and give a bit of feedback and have more informal talks. So you might notice there's a little bit of a change in attitude depending on which event you go to one on. But obviously, a lot of scouts do stuff like this as well. They hang out on different Slacks and Discords, so you can start the conversation early, but you have to set your expectations to be a little bit more relaxed as well. Would be what I'd say.
Yeah. I think something that I'll just really quickly add on to that is just basically knowing when to do the pitch, though. Based on what I said, I don't want people to think that if you meet somebody at a bar, you should get your iPad out and be prepared to pitch to a scout, right? Like there's a time and a place, and I think that's where the value of what Meg was saying in terms of having those little elevator pitches and being able to say to somebody like, hey, nice to meet you. Oh, we've just started a studio and we're making this meets this. If you're interested, let's do emails and then let's talk about it later, but let's just get to know each other tonight. Kind of know when you are pitching and when you're not, because there is a difference. And at the end of the day, scouts are people and probably also aren't always on like ready to receive pitch mode, right? Sorry, Josh.
No, I was just agreeing with what you were saying. I would just add on as well, like, I think who you're talking to matters a lot, because you're not always going to be pitching to people like us, game scouts, biz dev people. I think, game scouts are very, very used to seeing stuff in a rough and ready state and can use their imagination, kind of fill in the gaps, to kind of build a more accurate picture of what the game could and should be. But there will be points where you're invited as part of the process to pitch to the wider team, the wider publisher, like people in marketing, production, the CEO. You've got to be on it with those ones, right? So I think like context matters a lot in terms of those conversations and pitches. I think you can have a much more kind of casual, less. You don't have to be so worried about perfection when it comes to pitching to a scout or a biz dev person, because they have enough exposure to stuff in the early stages to give you that leeway and forgiveness. I think where that precision and professionalism comes in is later in the process, where you start getting introduced to people of different disciplines, and those folks are understandably being a little less forgiving.
100%, thank you. Just forgot to unmute myself there, as I was just chatting away. I have a question. It's sort of related to what you're talking about already, and I think it's not one that we've discussed already, but it's when we say we're pitching to someone and we say, it's Zelda meets Mario, whatever it is it because I've seen not discourse, but like I've seen conversation around this on online before about whether it's whether it's great because it gives people a clear picture of what exactly they're looking for, or whether it gives it a disservice because it kind of makes it seem like it's unoriginal. And so I'm curious to see what you all think about whether it's helpful or it hinders a pitch when people maybe, um, you know, refer to or compare their games to existing games already or existing IPs, and whether when there's if there's a balance to strike there, I suppose.
Who
Meg
wants
is.
to go for this?
I
Yeah,
love this question.
can I jump in? Because
Go
like
on.
Go for it.
I
Yeah.
have strong opinions on this. Um, I don't mind people making comparisons to other games or making that kind of easy association. So it's this. But if you're going to make those comparisons, you better understand what makes that game what it is and why it's successful. Um, Meg is going to laugh. If I see another roguelike that says we're like Hades, but this, and it doesn't actually like contain like anything that made Hades like work and why it was successful, I'm gonna lose my mind. Like I just Hades was successful not just because it was a roguelike, because it implemented very specific things. They spent a lot of money on voice acting, right? They had that kind of very deliberate, like uptime, downtime. A lot of other roguelikes like Enter the Gungeon, it's all uptime because the moment you fail, you're right back at the beginning of the dungeon. Whereas with Hades, like there's that deliberate pause, slow down, where you're talking to characters and getting some of the narrative and the character context before going back into the action. Like, so if you're gonna bring up games that are successful, if you're gonna make those comparisons, they better be valid comparisons. They better be games. You better be able to point to the specific things that you are taking from those games. It cannot simply be this game is successful and thus I want to be compared to it. It can't be that.
I mean, I think the one that I see the most of is Studio Ghibli. Is I've seen that referenced in 1,000 pitches because it's green or there's grass or something, and it's like no, there's more to Studio Ghibli stuff than that. But I think what I'd add to that is, I kind of quite often look at some of this stuff from a kind of marketing perspective, and I think the dangerous thing is when comparisons to other games are used as a crutch to explain what your game is. If you are entirely dependent on your game being X meets X, and you don't fully understand what your own player fantasy is, what your own world building angle is, what your own USP is, then it's a problem. I think Meg's example earlier of like meeting somebody at an event, at a networking event, and being able to say, it's Dark Souls meets Pac-Man, right? Like, okay, fine, I understand what your game is, and we should talk about that, and let's do the pitch thing, and let's have that conversation later. But if you then thinking about your Steam page and you're thinking about how you sell this to a bigger team and how you demonstrate to a group of scouts or group of publishers that you understand exactly what it is that you're making, you're saying, yeah, so it's basically just it's Dark Souls meets Pac-Man, without being able to explain why people should care and what that actually means for the player experience, then I think that's a problem. So I think the X statement is fine, but it's not the same as understanding what your kind of game pillars are, so to speak.
I have conflicting opinions about this tactic.
Hmm.
One is, um, don't flatter yourself, love. Nothing's truly original. So don't think too much about like, oh, is this me leaning on other things to sell my own thing? It's like we're all influenced by everything. Like, it's just how it is. Even if you think your idea is completely original and there's nothing else like it, deep in your creative brain, there will be things that have left an imprint that make up the DNA of your new idea, and that's okay. The only thing I don't like about X statements, as we call them, this meets this with a peppering of X, is that you are relying on the scout or the designer or whoever you're talking to have played every single game on the planet. And they might not have. So if you come up with like a really, obscure reference or just a game in a certain genre that this person doesn't play, and you rely on that as George says as a crutch, and you're like, hey, it's Dark Souls meets golf or something, and someone's like, I've never played Dark Souls, I know what golf is. Suddenly, if you don't have a backup statement or you don't have anything behind that, you're kind of grasping at straws. Like, oh, we're not speaking the same language. So like definitely have snappy little things that people who might have played all those games can get that quick, clear idea. But as George says, like have reference images, have, core player loops to talk people through what the player is feeling and why they would come back and why they would do this and why they would pick it over another game. Just so you're not assuming that everybody is a hardcore gamer, because as we've all realized, as we get older, we love games, but we have less time to play games. And there's so many games out there now that we're not necessarily going to have played all the same games as you. So if there is something that you love about this game that you've put in your statement, make sure, as Josh has said, that you can explain why. Even to someone that's never played it before. Like, I think we were chatting before this call started, and George was saying that he went to a slightly normie conference about branding. And if you say to them like, "Oh my God, this game," and it's not even that obscure, but they've never played it before, but they're holding the purse strings, you've locked yourself out that conversation. So make sure if you're going to use those things, you've got the backup to explain to people of varying gaming levels or not gaming at all what the game is actually about and what the experience is that you're trying to deliver.
That's
Yeah,
so helpful. Sorry, continue, George.
yeah. Just as an extension of that, some of our vocabulary in this industry is very what's the word I'm looking for? Uninviting. Like it blocks people. So the king of all of this is Metroidvania. Like that is a word that if you're in the games industry, I automatically know exactly what you're talking about when you say Metroidvania. But to someone who Meg was referring to, who's kind of outside the industry but is still like in charge of the money tap, like they don't know what Metroid is and they don't know what Castlevania is, right? So you should be able to like articulate what genres are without using the shorthand, right? Like the shorthand is useful for people in the know because it saves time. But if you have to be able to bring people with you and being able to kind of very specifically articulate what space your game occupies and what this language means is going to be important because you don't want to, if someone asks you what is a Metroidvania, you don't want to be fumbling for like 5 minutes struggling to come up with a definition. Have the definition in there ready to go.
I think all of this will come down to practicing. The more you practice, the more people are going to ask you questions or interrupt you with weird things. And like you just need to practice talking about your game to lots of different types of people, and seeing what lights their eyes up and seeing what clouds over their face and just adapting your pitch as you go when you're practicing with all these different people. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, having different versions, having that short, pithy kind of answer, having a kind of 15-minute pitch for like you get a half an hour slot at a lot of these events, but you might be running late. You also want to ask some questions. You're going to be interrupted. Maybe you want to show some gameplay videos, stuff like that. Then have a big fully written one because a lot of the time when you're pitching, you're not actually seeing the person on the other end. Like a lot of pitching these days can happen online. You send an email with a pitch attached or through like a website and things like that. So the more you practice and talk about your game, the more you'll know what information to hold back for big one, which to have in the middle, and which to have in short, little pithy, kind of lighting people's eyes up and getting them excited. But you won't know until you practice with various different people.
Yeah, 100%. We've got a couple of questions that I'm just going to throw in because they're relevant to the conversation. So we've got one that we're just talking about like A meets B. They've said, quick note, usually when I say, oh, it's going to be like X meets X, it's not about the features, the gameplay, but it's about the vibe or the feeling. What are your thoughts on that? We can start with George.
I think again, I think it's fine. I mentioned Ghibli. Like Studio Ghibli is one that's used a lot for like vibes, because it's colorful, saturated, but it's more than that. It's a world. There's usually a message behind it. It's so I think this kind of just talks to Josh's point earlier of basically like understand what sells that vibe. So if you want to say that your game is it's like the Smurfs. Like you need to be able to explain what exactly about the vibes of the Smurfs is, so that you can explain what that means to somebody who perhaps doesn't understand the reference. So, I think all the stuff that we've spoken about when it comes to mechanics also applies for vibes, right? You can't just say that this game feels like something without being able to explain how it feels like something. How does that inform your presentation? How does that inform your audio? How does that inform your visuals? How does that inform your game mechanics? How does that inform your world building? So I think a lot of the stuff that we said already, I think, applies to that same question. Basically, be prepared to explain what that means if somebody doesn't understand it, and make sure that you fully understand what the vibes mean when you're going for it.
Exactly. Just as long as you can back it up as to why I think it's relevant, instead of throwing buzzwords out there to get attention without realizing that actually it's
Hmm.
nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Um, Next
Ju-
question. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm jumping in. I would say it can be a big positive if what you're drawing inspiration from is like genuinely a little bit unique in the game space. Like one of the reasons why Disco Elysium was such a compelling pitch for a game idea is because their list of inspirations was so unusual for the games industry space. Like we're an industry dominated by games that are influenced by Aliens and by Star Wars and by Lord of the Rings and all that jazz. For them to say, oh, specifically season 2 of The Wire, about the dock and the union workers in that TV show, it's like, okay, that's new. That's compelling. So like if you're drawing influence in terms of tone and feel from something off the beaten track, I actually really want to hear about that and want to hear your passion for that inspiration. If it is, it's a double-edged sword. If it is, I love Ghibli, but there are a lot of pictures of Ghibli. I love Aliens, but there's a lot of pictures with Aliens, right? But if your feeling is actually this is a bit unusual for this space, like do focus on it because you might end up getting people excited.
I would say when preparing a pitch, it's okay to have a slide on both. Have a slide of like influenced by, and then a slide of practically kind of, this is actually like this game. Like you can have, like when I say like we'll probably talk about it later, but when you're putting together benchmarks, like commercial benchmarks, they can be based on both vibe and gameplay, but it's good to split almost. You can almost have like why you've included them and whether it's theme or whether it's gameplay. You can have like it's influenced by stuff like this, but it feels like this to play. And use your words. Like the English language is so beautiful in that there is so many different words that you can combine to explain both the feel and the theme and the inspiration of something in a quick way. You can go X and X is the experience that look like better, or in the style of this. So play about with your X statement until it fits, until the jigsaw puzzles let slot.
Yeah, I just a fleeting thought as we were talking about like unique pitches. I would have loved to see the pitch for Thank Goodness You're Here, which is, I don't know if any of you have played it, but it's so good and it's so humorous and unique. And I've not played a game like it, not quite like it anyway. So I would have been so curious to see what the what the pitching was like for that specific game. Um, but just moving on to another question. So someone has asked, what should you do as a developer if something goes wrong during your pitch? And also, how often does something go wrong in the pitches that you have seen?
Just leave. No, don't really. Just get up and go. I've embarrassed myself. Goodbye. No, don't. Um, if it really depends. Obviously, I assume this is like in person. Things go wrong all the time. We understand. I would say how often. How often things go wrong in a way that registers to me is not that often. But I know that other people definitely get flustered because, it's nerve-wracking and like it feels high stakes and things like that. But at the end of the day, almost every single game scout I've met is pretty nice. Obviously, like if you turn up late and you've got a bad attitude and then your laptop isn't charged and then this, that, and the other, it's a vibe check, right? Like an interview. I have been to interviews where I have turned up, I have fell over and knocked a glass of water over someone. I've turned up and had to have an ambulance take me away. I've had some crazy stuff happen to me in job interviews, and I still got the job or got referred to another job or something like that. It's about the vibes. Like, things go wrong as long as you're gracious and kind and respectful of the person's time, it'll be fine. If you like freak out and say something really rude or horrible or like anything, then obviously the person would be like, I don't know that I want to give this person a second chance. But if you're just a normal, nice human, like I've had someone like cry in a pitch of happy tears, but it was still like, oh, whoa, not because like we were like, here's a bunch of money, but I was just giving them compliments, and it obviously meant something to them, so they were welled up. It's a very human thing to pitch person to person. If the game scout hopefully is any good, they will understand the pressure that you've put on yourself to be in that situation, and they'll understand that you're nervous and that things might break. Try to back yourselves up, belts and braces. Have it as a PowerPoint presentation, have it as a PDF, have it saved offline. Do all of these things to like try to minimize these things, because you don't. If you walk into something and then something goes wrong, you're going to get all flustered. And even if you get it back, like you're going to be one step behind yourself and your heart's racing. But like if it does happen, just be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And just smile and like work your way through it, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, because it's
in
about
my
intent,
experience.
right, isn't it? If someone makes an honest mistake versus if someone's just like clearly got a terrible attitude. So I think most people are quite forgiving when it comes to things like that are obviously just,
I would hope so.
yeah.
And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's an interview that goes both ways. So if you turn up and something goes wrong and you're being as nice and as like apologetic as you can be, and the other person's rude, well, screw them. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need their money. If that's the kind of way they're going to treat the partnership, then you can walk away. Like, remember that it works both ways. So if you turn up with the right attitude and you've tried to prepare as best you can, and something still goes wrong, the other person should be nice and understanding and try to rearrange it. They might not be able to get you in at the same event. They might be completely back to back, but they will try and follow up with you at another time, if you run out of time. But if they're rude to you, leave it, love. You don't need it. That would be my advice.
Yeah. I think also, like, to direct the question more specifically to the person who asked it, I think a lot of the people who are riddled with self-doubt, and rake themselves over the coals over mistakes, are often making mistakes that wouldn't even register in most game scouts, like top 10 faux pas in a pitching situation. Like, I like the phrase "perfection is overrated, passion is better." Like, saying that perfection is overrated is not saying competence is overrated, preparation is overrated. Like, do all those things, like do all the things that Meg said, right? But I'm not gonna care if somebody like messes up a line and has to go back and say it again. Like, I don't care. I've already forgotten you did that. Like, you're beating yourself up like for the rest of the day because you hesitated over one line. I've already forgotten you did that because I just really like the pitch, right? So don't sweat the small stuff. Like, it really, it's not memorable. And I'm sure George and Meg will agree with me. There are so many people who arrogantly and they make some of the biggest faux pas, biggest mistakes, and they don't think they're messing up. Like, they just
Even
they just
register, does it?
they
Yeah.
it doesn't even register. They are so, like, it's so much worse. It's so much worse out there than you can possibly imagine in terms of the folks that treat us badly, right? So yeah, don't sweat the small stuff. Also, I would say, like, that part of you that is doubting yourself, that self-doubt, like, as much as it can be, like, awful at times, like, it is the thing that makes you good at what you do. Like, competent people doubt themselves. Competent people question themselves. Competent people review what they've done and, analyze where they've come up short. Like, if you're doing that, it's because you're good. Like, and that's a hard thing to internalize. Basically, everyone that I think is good at their job does it, and they don't think they're good at their job. And everyone that I think is incompetent is thinks they're God's gift to humanity, right? It's the hypocrisy of humanity, right? But like, I guess to the person asking, I will finalize my point. Sorry. I guess to the person asking the question, I would ask a question back and say, are the things that you're considering mistakes or mess ups really that big a deal in the grand scheme of things? Or are you just kind of overanalyzing the situation?
100%. And I think kind of rolling off what you've just said there, I wanted to talk a little bit about when things do go wrong and it has consequences, or whether things don't go wrong and it has consequences. And I'm talking about rejection specifically within that field, because obviously pitching is a very emotionally consuming thing to do. It's you're putting your passion project on the line for judgment, and it's very nerve-wracking, as you've already expressed. And so what happens when you get a no, and what should you do about that? Because obviously no's happen quite a lot, because a lot of the time game scouts are either looking for something very specific, or they've only got a limited amount of things they can take on and say yes. And same thing with funding, there is a limited amount of funding. So I guess what would be your advice to people who've maybe just got their first rejection or have had multiple rejections, and how to keep moving forward and keep that passion alive for the project that they're working on?
I mean, I think it's like anything else in that learning to deal with rejection, practice makes perfect, right? Which sounds quite terrifying, but I think it is a part of the industry, right? You know, we have to be kind of realistic about the situation as it is, and there's lots and lots of games that are looking for funding and looking for publishers, and there's only so many games that publishers can sign and take on. I think one of the biggest things that I would suggest is, and it's such a cliche and it sounds kind of so trite, but turn rejections into a learning opportunity. Is kind of try to move away from framing it as a rejection. Um, Constantly be on the move. I'd say, when it's the same thing when you're going for jobs, right? If you're applying for jobs, you should keep applying up until the point you've signed a contract and you've had your first day with your new company, because anything can happen at any point, and it's a reality of life. And I think it's the same with pitching, where even if you have a fantastic conversation with a scout, send out 3 more emails the next day to a bunch of other publishers to get those conversations moving, so that if you do get rejected, you're able to take something from that. You're able to understand something. You maybe get a reason why it was rejected. You learn something about the pitch that didn't go so well, and you've already got some new conversations happening elsewhere. Best case scenario, you end up having lots of great conversations with scouts, and a bunch of people want to sign your game, and then hey, you're in a fantastic negotiation position. Worst case scenario, you learn a load of stuff about what it is that you could be doing or changing to your project that will make it better for next time. And I think the other thing I'd say as well is learn to listen to feedback as part of that. If you do pitch 100 publishers and all of them say no, then there may be something deeper than just the way that you're pitching, the way that the deck is structured. There might be fundamentally a problem with the project, at which case, you know, it's a difficult thing in the game space to kind of cancel projects, to chop bits off. But I'm sure, we've all worked on projects that have been cancelled at various stages, I'm sure. It's a reality, and at certain points, the healthiest thing to do is to say, right, this clearly isn't the one that's going to get picked up. How do we take something from this? How do we do something completely new that is going to be more attractive to those discussions and more amenable to those, getting what we need from a business sense or a commercial sense? I think that'd be my take on it.
Fantastic advice. Especially the bit about like it's mine and Josh's job to be incredibly charming. No. But, but of course, like we if we really like your game, we're going to be really enthusiastic about it. Please continue to look. Like be wary of anyone who tells you to stop looking until you have what you want written on paper and signed, because the unpredictable nature of our industry right now means like you need belts and races, have your backups and have your backups to your backups, because things have been pretty uncertain. So be wary of anyone that tells you to be exclusive until you've got what you want on the dotted line. A thing about getting multiple rejections for a pitch, and as George said, like listening to people, try not. It's really hard because, as she says, it's your part of yourself is in this, and part of your belief is in this, and putting it out there. I will say, like, I admire anyone who does this, and I have so much admiration for what you do, because it's really personal. And I'm a failed artist. I used to be a creative person. I couldn't hack it, so you're already above me in that respect. But be wary that when you're communicating your idea, like, you might think it's the best idea ever, but listen to the people giving you feedback, because they, like me and Josh have sat on a panel before where someone has done a whole pitch, and at the end I just was like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And like, maybe you do have the best idea ever, and like more, like a whole bunch of game scouts can be wrong. Every game scout I talked to has got the one that got away, or the one that they just didn't understand that ended up blowing up. It could be this case, but like, we're not going to know if you're not communicating it efficiently. It could be a case that it's just the world isn't ready for your idea. It could be a case that you're not explaining your idea quite clearly, so it's not clicking in people's brains. And as George says, maybe it's just not the one right now. Maybe put it to the side, come back to it after the next project or something like that. But it's very hard to say don't take rejection personally, but it's not personal. The numbers, unfortunately, are just really tough. We get thousands, tens of thousands, depending on what publisher you are at, of pitches. A lot of us only sign anywhere between 5 to 15 games a year. So just looking at those numbers is tough. But if you're a good sport and if you have a cool idea, we do share it with each other, and we do root for you, and we will, retweet your stuff and wishlist your stuff, and like, be excited, enthusiastic for you. But obviously, if you're not taking rejection well, you're sending midnight emails saying you were wrong about me. Karma's a bitch. So like, try and keep your vibes positive. I know that's easier said than done, but make sure that you've got a good team around you. Like, pitching is a very emotionally laborious thing to do. Like, hopefully, like, if you're a solo dev, like, friends and family, like, confide in them, like, make sure that you're balancing your life correctly, because these things can take months and months. 6 months, a year, like, it can take this long. So it is a stamina, it is a marathon. And if if you're in a team of people and there's more than one of you that can pitch, like, take it in turns, pass the baton, confide in each other, go for a bowling trip after a really long week at something. Like, try and, pace yourself, because we do understand, and we get frustrated too on our end, like, when we really like a game and we can't move as quickly as we'd like to, or there's certain things that we need to have before we can move on. As I said, it's a very emotional, it's a very human process. Things will go wrong. Stay strong.
I agree with everything that's been said. I would add on the additional aspect of this, which is successfully signing your game is the short-term goal. The long-term goal is successfully selling yourself and the team. Meg just mentioned, we see thousands of pitches a year. If a scout or a biz dev person is taking time, and we don't have time to do this for every pitch, but if they are taking time to sit down with you and go through the feedback and conclusions based on the discussions that were had internally, the quiet part of that is that they're saying that they like you. Like, if they're doing that, they're saying, look, you folks are good. This isn't the one. You're not ready yet. But I want you to hear this. I want you to take this on board, because I want to keep talking to you. It may not be 6 months from now, may not be a year from now, may not be like until 2 years from now, but I want to keep in communication with you. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you get feedback or get, a rejection call. What the publisher is kind of softly saying is you won the argument for yourself. Like, you won the people argument, the company argument of, like, you're a team worth taking seriously. You're a team that is worthy of my respect. This just wasn't the pitch that was going to win. And Meg has already touched on this. We as Game Scouts absolutely all talk to each other. If you're mean or take feedback really badly, understandably, I can't speak for every Game Scout. Like, maybe there are a few people who are a bit too aggressive or blunt, but most of the folks that I know try to be tactful in their communication. If you respond to that really abusively and aggressively, everyone knows. Every publisher will know, and you've damaged yourself. Like, is in terms of your long-term reputation, it is, you're doing yourself a favor by taking it on board, taking it as constructively as possible, because you will get a second chance. You will get a second chance. You won't if you respond rudely. That's it. You're done. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's all really valuable, what everyone said. And I had some other things, but I actually want to go to the questions that are in chat because I think they're really helpful and they will touch on a lot of topics that we were going to discuss anyway. So apologies, it is from a little while ago, but there is a question asking if there's anything specific that you look for in pitches. I'm going to add on top of that, does that change depending on what exactly, where you are, what event you're at, like how does that change? And also, like, what does make a game stand out to you as someone who might be saying yes or no?
First misconception, I don't get to say yes or no. I only, like, as a Game Scout, you're sort of the first gatekeeper. We don't have the ultimate power to say yes at the end. So just to take that off the table. I know that's not what you meant, but just in case
Oh
anyone
no,
thought
of
that was
course.
the
No,
case.
it's good to understand that though, isn't it? Because it's I guess if you're going to give
With
them the
that
time of
initial
day to then
filter.
for you to pitch it to the higher ups, right? So it's good to understand that process as well.
Absolutely. Yes. So we can't say like yes or no. Ultimately, like, we kind of do that initial filter. Hopefully, like, within the meeting itself, like the scout or the representative or whoever will be able to kind of give you a little bit of feedback to give you an indication of, like, how likely it is to move through to the next stage and things like that, or what the barriers might be in the way of doing that. What was the question? I've forgotten. I'm sorry. I
So
kind of
it
went
was
on a tangent.
what do you look for in a pitch and what makes a game stand out to you?
Okay. There's obviously a bunch of basic information that has to be in there in order for it to be considered a proper pitch. What the game is, what the player experience is, why you're making it, who's making it, how much it's going to cost, when it's going to be finished, and what you want from a publisher. All of these things are the kind of basics. I always make sure to include something about the team because, as we've gone on and on and on about, like, you're not just selling the project, you're selling yourselves, and you're selling the whole development process, working together, like being in each other's, in each other's socks as such for the whole thing. So there's a little bit of that's a bit of an interview to check if the vibes are right, and, like, do I want to take these people who have pitched this game and introduce them to all the people I work with, or is that going to end badly? But obviously there's a lot of basic information. I've had, like, really, really basic pitches that I haven't been able to do anything with, like, because they are just a sheet of paper with a bunch of writing on. Try to represent your game as best as possible. Try and mix up the media. Have gifts of people, like, playing the game, different bits of the levels that you're excited or proud of. A trailer if you've got one or can afford one. If you can't, just a bit of gameplay is good. A lot of the time right now, depending on what stage you're at, if you want to be properly considered for funding, most publishers right now want a prototype or a demo. It's just where things are at the minute. After some of the things we've been seeing recently, a lot of publishers are a bit more risk averse. And if you're able to sit down and actually play this thing and get a feel for it, that ticks a lot of boxes for people. So they would be like the kind of basic things that I would say we would need to move things forward. But obviously, there's also practice pitches and vibe checks and things like that, which wouldn't need that stuff in. But that would be what I would consider the basics to be able to move it forward to the next stage of kind of like green light.
This isn't necessarily like, this isn't one of those things where I'm like, if you do this, you'll get signed. But this is one of those, if you want to get past me, you should be doing this. I will ask developers in an initial pitch, like, this is really exciting. This is a really cool idea. What's the mechanic or system that you're most worried about delivering? Like, what do you think is going to be the most technically demanding part of this game? And because there always is something about a development plan that's going to be a challenge or going to be difficult. If a developer's just honest and goes, you know what, this mechanic here, we've got some concerns around it. We'd appreciate your advice, your help as a publisher to kind of, and if you've got any kind of internal resource to kind of help guide this, like, I'd really appreciate that. Big green flag, like thumbs up. Yes, I will send you on to the next stage. If you say there's no problems whatsoever, we're super, super confident, we're going to execute everything on time, and there's not going to be any roadblocks whatsoever, big red flag, because either you're lying, which is the most likely thing, or you're too naive to be trusted around the development of this game. So just, I guess, like, this is a cliche, but honesty is the best policy. Like, that trust as a currency spends more than telling me exactly what I want to hear, right? So just be conscious of that.
Yeah, I think the core of it is the strongest pitches that I've seen, and the things that I always want to see is a team that's got awareness of what they're making, how they're making it, and why they're making it. And if a team is able to answer those kind of three core questions, it buys a lot of faith and buys a lot of trust. And I think that's kind of like the core of what Josh and Meg were saying. Is essentially, you're buying into a team for 5 years, and the best pitches I've seen, you've got a team that are aware of the commercial potential for a title. They're realistic with what those are. They're not comparing their roguelike deck builder to Slay the Spire. They're comparing it to mid-range other deck builders, and they still, with the maths, are able to say, we net out as long as we hit top 20% of roguelike deck builders. Great. They are able to succinctly explain what it is that they're making. Fantastic. Why they're passionate about it, and they're able to talk to the resources they'll need and the support they'll need. And if a deck is able to do that in 10 to 15 slides, I'd argue you've got a pretty strong pitch for most titles. On the flip side, like, I think when you've got decks that are 30 slides long, that have full slides of world building expo and are never going to get rid, when you've got teams that, aren't super clear on, I think one of the worst things I've seen is, and I see it quite a lot, is when, let's say a developer's asking for 1.5 million, and in all their competitor research, all the competitor stuff they're looking at has made £750,000, and you go, okay, so even if we do as well as these other games that you're looking at, we're losing 50% of the investment, right? Like, so be aware of, who's making it, how, why, and what is it. And as long as you're able to answer those succinctly and with strong self-awareness of where the weaknesses are, where the support's needed, all that kind of stuff, I think you're mostly on a pretty solid track.
Brilliant,
I'm going to add a
thank you.
spicy one after Josh has been delivering some truths and some desk banging today. Don't make me play your demo. Don't make me play your demo in front of you. Have a demo, send it to me afterwards. If you're pitching to me, I want to know you. I want to know the game. I want to know all of the things that have been mentioned. If you waste 15 minutes with me trying to talk to you and also play a game, and I keep getting stuck on a platform because I can't do them both at the same time, I'm just going to get frustrated, and I'm going to remember that you made me feel uncomfortable. Sorry. The best time for a scout to play your game is at home. Obviously, if you feel the need to send an NDA and things like that before you're comfortable sending it, that's totally fine. But yeah, like don't make me play it there. I'm here to meet you. I'm here to hear your pitch. Yes, even better, if you're sending the prototype, also send a video of someone playing the prototype or little cheat bits so people can jump through it. So if we really like the game and we want to show it to other people who aren't gamers or aren't able to play the game, we can show them bits of it without having to play the first level 100 times.
Uh,
Advice.
skippable cutscenes as well, please. If you see a cool game and it's got a 15-minute cutscene to start with, it might be fine for the scout if they set a bunch of time. But even then, they're probably not going to. 15 minutes is too long. But even if it's 1 minute, make sure that it's skippable so that if they're showing somebody in the office, they can go, look how cool this gameplay is without having to sit through 70 lines of dialogue that slowly crawl onto screen, Star Wars style, right? Make that experience as frictionless as possible. Would be my advice.
Don't be just an extension of George's point. Don't be afraid to leave the publisher with questions if they're positive questions. Like, cold opens that kind of are in media res and TV shows are effective for a reason. Because if Breaking Bad starts with Walter White immediately in a van, two people are poisoned in the back, and you're like, what the hell's going on? Like, what is this? Like, you're excited, you're engaged. Like, if the demo or whatever you're showing kind of just immediately throws me in, but it's exciting, and I'm asking good questions like, oh, what's this? This is cool. Like, how does that work? That's good. Like, don't worry. Like, don't be afraid of the good questions. Like, you don't need to do the 15-minute monologue about the backstory of the world. As long as I'm excited, you're winning.
100%. I think we have time for one more question, as long as you're all happy to run over slightly by a few minutes. And it's something that a couple of people have asked or alluded to within their questions. And it is basically, how do you figure out what to ask for? I know we've touched on it a little bit in looking at what other games that are similar to yours are, might be asking for or what they've made, but basically, how do you know what to ask for? And then is it just looking at what you're missing, what you're struggling with? Is it marketing? Is it translation? Like, what exactly are you supposedly going to be using it for? But then also, how do you figure out how much a game will cost? Big questions. A big one to land on as a final question, but I just think they're important to get a vibe from you three.
It's very simple. You are worth a certain amount of money as an employee within your company. Make sure you're paid a salary. Like, I know, I think with the established teams, you don't need to say that, but there are so many student teams that are like, yeah, we're doing this part time, and yeah, we just need to pay the licenses for such and such and such and such. And I'm like, no, you're putting time into this. This is a job. Like, figure out what you're worth. Like, figure out your value as an employee within your company and pay yourself a salary. Like, that is the time it takes. Like, that is the cost of your game. I think things like marketing and stuff like that, like, you can have like a stab at, like, we think this is how much it will cost. It's good to demonstrate like that you've researched. Ultimately, that's more of the publisher's domain, I think, in most cases. But with dev cost, it's pretty simple. Like, what are your overheads? What is the value of your employees?
Put it up. Things always go wrong. We encourage most developers to put a contingency of at least 10% in their budget. That's not 10% of just salary, that's 10% of the budget of the game. You need to figure out what you're going to pay your team, what overheads you have, such as tech, if you're going to be working from home, if you're going to do an office, all of these things. But make sure you're not doing yourself short. Like, make sure you're comfortable. Don't pay yourself minimum wage. Pay yourself like a comfortable salary. I don't mean like buy yourself a yacht and 10 coffee machines and God knows what else, but like, make sure that you are respecting yourself with what you're asking for, because games take a long time to make sometimes, and the economy is a little bit down the shitter at the minute, so make sure you got enough enough money to turn your heating on and to do all of this kind of stuff. Be kind to yourself and be kind to your team, without taking advantage too much. Also, like, it's okay to put together a pie chart of what you think the cost will be and say, like, this is our estimate, we're still working on it. One of the things I don't like is when teams ask me, how long do you think I should spend making this game? That's really not up to me. You know this game, you know what you want it to be. You're going to have to spend time researching how long it takes to add all these features. You need to talk to the people that you want to work on the game and figure out how much they want to be paid. Get a couple of prices if you haven't got someone specific in mind. Do a kind of average. It's not up to me to tell you how to make your game. It's up to the publisher to help you make the game and support you and fill in some of those blanks. And if there's some blanks that you don't know how to fill in, say like porting, localization, things like that, that does fall normally within the publisher's domain. So just say, I've looked online, people say it costs about this much, but I haven't included it in my budget. Here are some estimates, just to show you're thinking about it. That would be my advice. And also there's a lot of like starting business courses and things like that available through Creative UK and things like that that might have some more in-depth kind of spreadsheets and stuff that you can use to work with this.
Sorry, George, if you're going to come in, but Meg's comments just made me think of something. In terms of like the cost of the project, obviously there are going to be limits to the types of things that certain publishers can fund. Absolutely, just to reinforce with Titanium what Meg just said, absolutely do not compromise on what you think you're worth. If the project's too expensive, the scope of the project needs to come down, right? Like, if your team is worth a certain amount of money, that's what they're worth. Like, and you should strongly advocate for your team to be worth that. But if the project overall is coming in too expensive, you need to rethink the scope of the project instead. Like, that's where I would cut rather than the salaries.
Yeah,
Agreed.
no notes.
Awesome. Well, if you've got nothing to add, in which case I think that is the end of this panel. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you so much to our panelists for imparting a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. I hope it's been really helpful for everybody in the chat as well. I know there's been some great questions, and I think there's been some great answers as well. So thank you so much. This has been recorded or will be uploaded to YouTube, probably tomorrow morning or Friday morning. So it will be there to refer back to if you want to just re-go over anything and make notes. But with that being said, thank you so much. If you're interested in what you've heard today and you want to chat to other devs who are taking part in our jam, for example, you can go and join our Discord, which is discord.gg/safertogether, which is on the screen, and get in touch with us just on our website or on our itch page. There's a lot of people who are willing to help you, and I know there's a lot of people who are super passionate about seeing these games come out of this game jam. So yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out and ask any further questions. I'm sure we'll find the answers for you. But yeah, other than that, thank you so much, and we will see you at the next masterclass. Bye.
Thanks for having us.